Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Thanks for joining us for the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm joined by Evin Epstein, and she is just a rock star in sustainability in New York City. And we're going to talk about new buildings, existing buildings, and some really high LEED and even a little bit of WELL marks. So, Evin, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charlie. I'm excited to be here.
Now, I've really enjoyed working with you over the last several years on LEED projects, but we met in a class and passing a LEED credential. So, congrats on your LEED credential. And I know you're doing a lot more training even within SL Green. So is that important within the company to get more and more credentials?
Definitely. All of the credentials and continued learning is sponsored by SL Green. So if an employee is interested, we definitely fund and support anyone's initiative, whether it be LEED, WELL, or even, 32 BJ classes.
Yeah. Good. Well, let's talk career. That's what we do on this Green Building Matters podcast. And so take us back to maybe college and Lehigh, and then you've even got a master's. So, take us back to college and how did you get started on the path you're on now?
Sure. So I took an environmental ethics class when I was a sophomore at Lehigh, and the class was focused on giving natural resources legal rights, and that totally turned my thinking on its head. I had never heard of anything like that, and I really fell in love with the whole movement. So as an undergrad, I declared an environmental science and studies major. And then Lehigh has this really awesome program where if you maintain a certain GPA as an undergrad, so that's above a 3.85, they actually pay for your master's degree.
Oh, wow.
So, I got my master's degree for free from Lehigh in environmental policy design.
Now, there's this advertisement at the Atlanta airport that says even Earth needs a good lawyer, too. So when you said natural resources, legal rights, because you then went on and got your master's in environmental policy, right?
Exactly.
So why that? Was that one of the few they had around environmental, or why policy?
Yeah, policy, that was really the only option I had as a master's student at Lehigh, because they do have kind of a narrow sustainability program, but at the time it was a perfect fit, and now couldn't it be more relevant with all of the 80 by 50 legislation that's being passed in New York City by de Blasio.
A lot of policies coming out of New York, and New York's a leader here, and I know you oversee a lot of buildings, and you've got to make sure they're not just compliant with the laws, but what's around the corner. So what have been some of the harder laws while we're talking policy to comply with? Yeah,
it's been a really delicate balance of, trying to plan to incorporate a lot of efficiency measures in 5 to 10 year capital plans, but we don't really know what's in the pipeline yet. There's been a lot of ideas thrown out there, so we've really been on our toes. So far, what we think is definitely going to be passed is having a building energy grade, so that corresponds with the building's Energy Star score. So if your building has an Energy Star score of a 90 or above, that building is going to be graded with an A. For us, that's a little unsettling because we all know that to get an Energy Star label, you have to have a performance of an Energy Star score of a 75. So I really wish that it correlated more closely with Energy Star, just for public's sake. I feel like the layperson won't really understand that discrepancy. So a majority of my portfolio that are high performers are going to get a B. That's been a little tricky adjusting to that. But another piece of legislation that we definitely think is going to be passed is caps on fossil fuel emissions for buildings. So KBTU caps on buildings.
That'll be a game changer.
Yeah, that's going to be a game changer.
And for those listening, here in New York City, where we're recording this today, there's local law 84. You have to share how much energy and water does your building use. There's local law 87. You have to retrofit and really do better, save energy, and do those deeper studies. But then, like Evan's saying, is by 2020, you're going to have a kind of like a nutrition score, right? A health inspector score on the door as you enter in the big office building here. And I agree. I think the scale's a little off, but you'll have an A, B, C, D. And again, it's pushing for transparency and putting pressure on big landlords. But I know your portfolio, and you have a lot of great Energy Star scores, so it should be good.
We represent currently 8% of all of the Energy Star labels achieved in Manhattan, which is a huge number. So that's something we're really proud of, and definitely prioritize Energy Star in our portfolio. It's a really good way to benchmark our performance.
That's fantastic. So college and got the master's, that's helping you with some policy now, but then I think you worked with the mayor's office just a little bit as well.
So just going back a little bit, I actually interned for SL Green for 2 summers when I was still in college because I knew our executive, Mark Holliday, was a Lehigh alum.
Sure.
So I reached out and got really lucky and was able to intern here for 2 years. And when I graduated from my master's program, I reached back out and there wasn't any space in the sustainability program. So I interned for the Mayor's Office of Sustainability for 4 months, which was an awesome experience, especially now, as I mentioned, a huge part of my job description has been navigating all of the New York City legislation. So I really got to see the inner workings of MOS, which has really helped to translate now in my job. And then Liz Mikowski, my boss, brought me back in for an interview and they hired me full time, and I've been here for 2.5 years.
And I know you're building out a sustainability and energy team here, and I just love working with you and Liz and the rest of the team. So you are greening up a lot of real estate. SL Green, for those that don't know, is the largest commercial landlord in New York City. A lot of buildings, big buildings too. So let's talk about sustainability. I mean, you really knew early you wanted to make a career in sustainability when you took some of those early classes, got the master's in it. I mean, this is your path. You just knew.
I really fell in love with the topic, but my dad was the one that connected the dots between sustainability and the built environment. I felt like when I was kind of early on in my college career, I was in the grassroots organizing bubble, and I couldn't really see sustainability on a macro scale, and he was the one that connected it because he kind of had LED experience and saw all that potential when that market was first emerging, and he said there's so much opportunity here, and he connected the dots for me, and I'm still grateful for him to doing that and opening my eyes.
And would maybe he's one of your early mentors?
Totally.
Do you have some others that have influenced your career so far?
Yeah, definitely. My boss right now, Liz Mikowski, is the smartest person I've ever worked with. Awesome. She has married her operations experience with sustainability, and the two just seamlessly, they have to be together. I don't know how we would operate otherwise. Sure. She controls the budgets, and she works closely with our engineering team and all of our staff. So the marriage of the two has really, I think, transformed SL Green's sustainability program over the past 3 years since she's been appointed Director of Sustainability.
It's so important to have a mentor. I give advice to those kind of maybe jumping into a green career, maybe not even just green buildings, and I say you might want to go about it the real estate angle, the policy angle, the renewables. There's a few ways, but to your point is if you got the real estate and operations experience, and then you can get into sustainability, like it's going to be able to be implemented so much smoother. Yeah.
I totally agree. And also those who are first starting out, I would definitely take some engineering classes. Sustainability is inextricably linked with energy efficiency, and you have to understand what's going on with all the building systems. So.
And everyone has real estate. I mean, I argue if you work from home, if you lease space, if you own a building, if you're a tenant in a big building, everyone has something to do with some kind of real estate. So if you know how to do sustainable real estate, of course, I'm biased. That's what you and I do, but it really can affect any person in any company. So let's talk about projects. Let's talk about big projects. One thing that's unique about SL Green as an owner, a manager, developer is you get to work on both sides of the house, so to speak, lead for new construction and lead for existing buildings.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about One Vanderbilt. So that's one of your trophy towers going up right next to Grand Central. It's pursuing LEED and WELL. Can you give us some highlights on that big project?
So One Vanderbilt is actually going down a LEED path that's unprecedented. We're on target to achieve LEED Platinum under version 3 and LEED Gold under version 4, which makes sense because according to the USGBC, LEED version 4 is 10 to 15% more stringent than version 3. So we're going down both paths now, tracking every single credit under both versions of LEED. So that's been a really eye-opening kind of exercise to see what really changed between both versions of LEED. It's been incredible, though.
It's super smart. I mean, it's a massive project, and There's a lot of construction going up in Manhattan, but that's just going to be such a great office building. But V3, V4, you'll make the decision later. I mean, if you've implemented so much sustainability in designing and building green, it's going to be a great building, but make that decision a little later. So super smart to keep your options open.
Exactly. And not only are we going to be one of the first well-certified buildings in New York City, we're also investing $17 million in sustainability features that go above and beyond code requirements to make sure that the building really achieves one of the lowest carbon footprints in New York City.
That's so important. I know there's another building, not to be named, that was built LEED Platinum out of the ground. Great building, but depending on how it's going to operate later too, that could change. But if you guys are really making sure you want to reduce the carbon footprint, you're not just chasing LEED points, it's a huge deal.
Exactly.
Talk about well a little bit. It's the hot topic. We have green buildings. Now we have this wellness movement. One Vanderbilt's going to get a well certification, but what do you think of the wellness movement?
Exactly. I think with LEED, that's really a core and shell, but with well, we're going beyond core and shell, and it's really impacting our tenants.
Okay.
We're doing everything from responsible materials, so like low VOC paints and, making sure that the water is the highest quality, air is the highest quality, that pollutants entering the building are minimized. So doing all of those tenant-facing elements to ensure that our tenants are going to be in the highest quality environment. I think that study shows that 90% of our lives are spent indoors. Yeah, so we're really making sure that our tenants have, the highest quality indoor environment quality. And
yeah, One Vanderbilt, for those that want to look it up later, very tall building, very large building right here in New York City. There's just a couple that are going up near Grand Central right now. So other highlights though on One Vanderbilt.
Other highlights for well is going to be access to daylighting, even biophilic elements. We're going to make sure that I think it's around 86% of tenants are going to have quality views by sitting there. The ceiling height, floor to ceiling, are 16 feet. So that's really that's kind of unprecedented. And so there's going to have that really, unprecedented access to daylight that a lot of offices lose in older buildings.
A great building. It's under construction now, and I'm excited for LEED and well, dual certification.
Yeah, it's going to be a home run.
So let's talk about existing buildings, because as the largest landlord in New York City, you have a lot of existing buildings. We've been fortunate to work with you on a lot of these LEED for existing building projects on a volume scale. What's the difference for those listening? You got to retrofit, right? How do you green up an existing portfolio? What are some highlights there?
Yeah, so for One Vanderbilt, you kind of have a blank slate, and I would want to say it's easier to achieve LEED because we're still in that process where we could tweak design, we could tweak policies, we can even put, green lease clauses for our tenants. You have so much bandwidth and so much flexibility in shaping LEED where, in an existing portfolio, you're restricted by what's there and what's not. So there's been a big push with making sure all of our plans and policies that are implemented are consistent with LEED standards. There's been a lot of communication with tenants, although we don't have the same leverage that we would at a One Vanderbilt where we're, new in lease negotiations. We still are communicating with them around tenant comfort and transportation. Being in New York City, those transportation credits under LEED are really kind of center to our certifications. That gets us about a third of the way there, which is extremely lucky for us. Even doing things that, like swapping out lighting fixtures to LEDs, swapping out water fixtures to low flow fixtures, those things help with LEED. It's really is kind of low hanging fruit. It doesn't take a revolution to get LEED in an existing building.
I'm happy to hear you say that. And,
you might have a different experience. You're the Army.
it's the consistency. You're right. And you've done a really good job, Evin, of, there might be some local laws that require you to report your data and save energy and do reports, but LEED wants you to do that too. So you can kill two birds with one stone there, and it all just lines up. So don't wait till you have to do it. Be proactive. Get these LEED certification now at high levels. A lot of gold buildings too out there in your portfolio. So no, I agree. And for anyone listening, LEED for existing buildings, you have to prove day to day you operate as a green building.
Right.
One Vanderbilt, new construction, let's design and build it green, clean slate. Existing buildings, some might say it's a little harder. Sure, are we operating green day to day? Where can we continually improve? So It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of also synergies between LEED and sustainability reporting because you have to compile a lot of metrics for LEED and there's a lot of data that you have to keep your eye on. It's actually really helpful for GRI reports and other reporting, performance reporting initiatives.
Yeah, let's talk about reporting and data. You every year put out a sustainability report for the entire company. You have a lot of great highlights in there, but what's some data you focus on and maybe you're most proud of?
Right, so we try to touch on 3 buckets when we're structuring our sustainability reports. It's ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Environmental is all that performance data, whether it be, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, waste, water, all of that fun stuff. And then social is more kind of our community impact. And governance is how we support our employees with education benefits and how our board of executives and our CEO oversees our sustainability program.
It's fantastic. You put it out every end of the year, towards the end of the year.
Exactly, every December.
And you highlight your LEED projects, you highlight One Vanderbilt, but as well as energy, water, waste, and all the other things you said, the team, the employees, the philanthropy, and the education. So it's a very thorough report. We can put a link to it in the show notes so that everyone can really see what SL Green's doing as a green leader here. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Anything else on data, though, that you look at?
Yeah, I think that right now the sustainability landscape has a lot of reporting fatigue. So that's really why I like GRI, because although we have to meet a checklist, I think that everything in the checklist is extremely material to our day-to-day operations, whereas we're getting hit, I would say this is a heavy reporting month by at least 5 different ESG indexes where we don't have control over the data really, where we're getting penalized for things that are outside of our operational control. And that's been really hard juggling that, because a lot of times I'm tempted to tailor our sustainability report to try to hit some of those checks for external reporting programs, but it's not really that material to our day-to-day. So finding that balance has been a really interesting shift. And to be fair, for those external reporting programs like MSCI and Dow Jones, real estate companies aren't their target audience. Their target audience are investors. Sure. So they don't have to really change their methodology for us.
I like that. Reporting fatigue, and we have a lot of data, but can we boil it down to some smaller data we can act on? But yeah, it's good. Well, no, you got 9 LEED buildings last year, LEED EB, more coming in 2018. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about you and your career so far. So, Evin, what would you say is your specialty? What are you really good at so far in your career?
I think my specialty is really my communication, being able to tailor the sustainability message to all the different stakeholder groups that I interact with. So that involves, talking to the mayor's office, talking to community organizations, selling efficiency projects here to our executive team that think in dollars and cents, talking to engineers about how to actually implement these projects. There's so many different interests and moving parts with sustainability, and everyone, has the same end goal, but you need to pitch it differently depending on who you're talking to.
I totally agree. I've worked with you a lot here, but you're right. You've got to talk to a lot of different audiences, and they're all stakeholders. They all have some kind of impact on all these buildings.
And even our tenants who, that we've seen over the past year really an uptick in sustainability. I think due to the New York City recycling law, it really got the conversation going, and I couldn't believe how many tenants were invested in improving their recycling. So that was a really positive story that came out of that law.
And for those that don't know, a lot of tenants in New York City, they have net leases, so they have to pay their own power bill. And in this case, they now could get fined if they're not doing recycling like they're supposed to be. So it's front and center that tenants, small and large, they're more in it than, say, just the landlord.
Definitely. And I think tenants in New York City kind of have an unprecedented responsibility for sustainability in the context of all of this 80 by 50 legislation. They say that tenants are responsible for consuming 60 to 80% of a building's energy. So we can make sure that our base building systems are as efficient as possible. But if we don't have tenants that are partnering with us and kind of adapting and changing their behaviors, then we're not going to be able to meet those goals. So really getting tenants involved on the ground has been a focus of mine over the past year.
And it is one of the hardest parts of a lead for existing building project is tenant engagement and education. You're going to have some that are green champions and want to know, what else can we do, Evin? What else can we do, Charlie?
Exactly.
And then some that it's going to take some legislation, some pushes, some new laws for them to take a little more notice. But let's talk about productivity. It's a fun topic. I'm a fan of hacking, different productivity hacks. So what routines, rituals do you have that make you successful?
Yes, I have to exercise not every morning.
All right, got to get that exercise in.
Because a lot of my job involves, sitting down at a desk. I'm fortunate enough to have a standing desk.
Right.
But for me to really be able to put a full day in of focus, I need to get some of that extra energy out when I'm in exercising. And at night, to wind down, I always read before going to bed. And that also really helps me get a much more rested night of sleep.
So important.
Yeah.
Sleep and exercise helps with stress. Exercise, though, you swim, you run. What kind of exercise?
I swim, I run, I do yoga, I do Pilates, I do anything under the sun that gets me moving.
That's amazing.
I love to do it.
I'm a big fan of a bucket list. I actually have a lot of items on my bucket list. Some adventure, some just crazy things that I think will bring me some happiness. You don't have to do them all at once over the next several years. It's a bucket list. It's a life list. But what would be one or two things on your bucket list you really would want to do?
Yeah, number one on my bucket list is going on a safari. I really want to see elephants and other, animals in the wild. Not before it's too late, but I really want to have that appreciation and see it in person, not in a zoo. So that's...
Sure, safari.
Safari, that's totally my number one.
That's awesome. Anything else? Any other travel or adventure?
Yeah, definitely travel as much as I can.
Okay. That's awesome.
Whatever.
I love safari. How about books? You mentioned you love to read. So is there a recent book you've read or listened to or even a classic that you say, this is a great book? Maybe someone listening would like to read it, or it'd be a great gift for someone.
Yeah.
Any kind
I'm
of book.
trying to think. I have hated the last couple of books.
I listen to a lot of books on Audible. I try to read some, but listen to a lot of podcasts. But just curious, any books? Do you like fiction or nonfiction?
I definitely like fiction.
Yeah.
Nonfiction more
That's so funny, yeah.
I'm
all nonfiction. My wife is all fiction.
Yeah.
But she gets into it and can stay up all night listening or reading books. Yeah.
I think the most eye-opening book I recently read was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's a man who's writing a letter to his son about race relations in this country, and it's really interesting to hear his perspective, and I think now more than ever it's extremely relevant. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll check that out. Thank you for that recommendation. Just a couple more questions here. Again, talking careers, green buildings. Say someone were to jump into this green building movement now. Any career advice or words of encouragement, something someone should know?
Yeah, I think networking in this industry is so important. I think you can learn so many different nuances, and there's so many aspects of the green building movement that talking to people and listening and going to all of the educational, events, whether it be green build or even something smaller, is so important. I think that because it's such an emerging industry, the technologies are developing, the expertise are developing at such a rapid pace that you could literally miss a whole movement in a short period of time. I feel like one day I was doing green building and the next day I woke up and well was at the forefront, and tenant amenities are huge, and indoor environmental quality is now at the forefront, and I look back and I don't remember how it happened so quickly, but it's here, and I think it's here to stay. So
networking, you're absolutely right. And to me, networking too is asking great questions and then listening. Because if you're around some super smart people that maybe are a little more in the know, then you've got to ask questions and then listen. So, Evin, this has been a lot of fun, and we covered a lot, new buildings, existing buildings, a lot about your story, and just want to say thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for being
thank you so
on the
much,
podcast
Charlie.
today.
And if I could do a little shout out to Charlie and his team at SIG, they really were instrumental in transforming SL Green's sustainability program. They're so approachable and smart in the strategies that they suggest for us, and they're always economical and rational. And their team is full of rock stars, and we're so grateful for the partnership that we've developed with you guys.
Well, it means a lot, and thank you so much. That's awesome.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.